Okay, so let's start. Uh, Thank you very much for joining me this afternoon here. I'm located in Barcelona. Probably for some of you, it's early in the morning or even late in the afternoon or evening. I hope everybody can hear me clear. If there's any issue, just send a message on the chat channel and we'll try to fix it. Okay, so uh, this is a talk about uh, XtraBackup. This is the Percona tool to perform backups, and it's divided into two parts. The first part is a little bit philosophical one because we will talk about backups, and in the second part we will cover the basics of XtraBackup. Just after this session, there's another session with a presenter who is really he's a really wonderful guy and very interesting. I strongly recommend you to attend the session. He's also very original, and then he decided to name the session Dr. XtraBackup, or how I learned to stop worrying and love backups. The title of this conference is based on a movie called Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. The thing is that backups are something sometimes a little bit worrying, and this is the main reason for this talk. But first, I have to introduce myself. My name is Pepla. I'm father of 3 kids and 2 cats, and in my spare time, uh, I'm a consultant at Percona. You can find me in Twitter and social networks with @Pepla. As I said, the first part of the talk is about philosophical reasons or philosophical subjects. In my career, very often I've been asked the same question over and over again. And the question is, what is my ideal backup strategy? Usually, when I get this question, I think you are wrong. Because why? Why do I think you are wrong? Because a strategy is the skill of making or carrying out plans to achieve a goal. So if you have a backup strategy, your goal is the backup. But backups by themselves are not a goal. Backups by themselves are just tools. Okay, what are your goals? Your goals usually are to protect your data, or to ensure your business survival, or to achieve some kind of legal compliance, or maybe all these goals together. So nobody gets up in the morning and says, "Oh, I need to make a backup." No. The problem is that there are risks, and you have to protect yourself from those risks. This means that you shouldn't have a backup strategy. You should have a recovery strategy. You must focus on recovery. Because if you have, let's say, 99 successful backups and 1 failed recovery, it's worse than having 99 failed backups and one successful recovery. What I mean is the important thing for you is recovery, is not backups. Obviously, it's obvious that if you want to be able to recover, you need to make backups. But you need to make backups based on the risks you are facing. There is also a really important difference between recover and restore. Recover means to become successful or normal again after being damaged or having problems. You want your business to recover. Okay? You want your business to become normal. Restore is return something or someone to an earlier good condition. Well, 1 week ago, the data from 1 week ago was good, and recovering the data from 1 week ago is restoring. But under some circumstances, restoring the data from 1 week ago won't guarantee the survival of your company. What's the problem? Well, the problem is that if you plan for recovery, the amount of possible incidents is enormous. You can have a crazy programmer, you can have a fire on your data center, you can have a huge explosion, criminals, hardware failing, um, mass destruction like meteorites or volcanoes or things like that. You can have floods, you can have malware, you can have bugs in software, you can have a bunch of different things that can fail. At the same time, uh, you need to define, or you need to know, what are the possible incidents you want to be protected of. For example, well, in the case of a mass destruction event like a giant meteorite coming to the Earth, well, probably you will lose your data, but it will not matter that much. Okay. So at the same time, for example, if you are just storing uh, 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 logs from your website for analytics, you don't need to keep that data up to the moment. And even if you lose a couple of days of data, well, that's not the ideal situation, but this is something you can live with. So the thing is that, unfortunately, to have absolute protection, you need an infinite budget, because the number of possible events is really so high that well, you can't really cover yourself for each and every incident uh, without spending a huge amount of money. So when you plan for your recovery strategy, you need to define a limited set of incidents. Those, for example, that have the higher probability, or that pose a higher risk for your company, or those which you can protect yourself quite cheap without a high cost. And then you need to design your backup, restore, and availability methodologies to ensure that you can recover from those incidents. So the answer on why your backup strategy is probably wrong is because you should focus on recovery. And well, it can seem so quite obvious that we should focus on recovery, but that's not always true. Actually, there's something that I like to call the Schröedinger Backup, because backups are quite like suffering a phenomenon of quantum physics called quantum superposition. And this means that a backup can be dead and alive at the same time. For example, you could complete successfully a backup, but for example, you can't restore it. Or you can restore it uh, in a time that's too long for the backup to be relevant. I used to work for a company that made some numbers and said, okay, if there's an incident and we are not able to recover in 3 days, it makes no sense to try to recover. Because the amount of money we will lose under these circumstances will be bigger than what we can deal with, and bigger than what the insurance covers. So in case of an incident that lasts more than 3 days, that's all. So why a successful backup can be irrecoverable? Well, for example, as I said, too long to restore. Also, and I've seen this in the past, bugs in backup or bugs in the storage system. Another option is that you are making the backup, you are making it in a wrong manner. For example, some people perform snapshots of volumes, but you must make sure that all the data you have is located in the same snapshot to be consistent. So for example, if in case of an emergency, you allocate more storage from another disk storage, and you use this disk storage for your database, well, you can't do snapshot-based backups anymore. Another option is, for example, if the infrastructure is not available. Lots of people does backups, but they don't have a support contract that allows them to get access to the same kind of hardware in a short period of time. So imagine you have a huge server, and if you don't have a gold support contract usually, you can just have the backup, have the technology and the ability to restore the backup, but you don't have the server. And under some circumstances, getting a server can take really some time. And even in under those circumstances, if you say, okay, I'm going to move to the cloud, well, uploading the backup to the cloud can take a long time. I remember the good old days when we did tape backups. One very important thing that you should take into consideration writing a tape backup was the location of files. Because, for example, if you write the catalog of the backup at the end of the backup, you need to move forward till you reach the catalog, and then you need to rewind to start recovering. This means that recovering from tape will take twice the time. So this means that you need to have the catalog on a different tape, for example, just for catalogs, or on a different support. Okay, so how can we know if the cat is dead or alive? Well, the only way to know this is just to open the box. You have to perform restore and recovery tests, and ideally you have to do it as frequent as possible. And this joins also with the idea of you don't need to have a backup strategy, you need to have a recovery strategy. You need to plan how to recover. You have to train yourself on how to recover. You have to know what to do when you need to recover something. just because usually recovery is an emergency situation, and you want those who drive the ambulance to know the exact path to arrive to the hospital as fast as possible. You know the doctor that is going to help you in the emergency room to know exactly what an emergency is, what kind of emergency he is dealing with. And pretty much the same for backups. If you need to restore, you can't start searching for PDF files where there's a procedure that was described 5 years ago by somebody who was not you. Okay, this was the first philosophical part of the talk. Now we are going to talk about the Swiss Army knife of MySQL backups. Uh, I like to call it the Swiss Army knife of MySQL backups because actually Percona XtraBackup can do a lot of different things, all related with backups. But at the same time, those features can be used for doing very different things, like, for example, rebuilding slaves, cloning servers, uh, and also can help you in compliance. So some of the features that Percona XtraBackup has is you can do a full backup, of course. You can do incremental backups. You can do partial restore. This means that you can restore just one table, for example. You can do your backups encrypted. You can store your backups into the cloud. You can compress your backups. The backups are portable as long as the InnoDB files are compatible between both platforms. You can stream the backups. This means that, for example, you can take a backup and send that backup to another server. And it's fully compatible with Oracle MySQL and Percona Server for MySQL. And actually, if you know how Percona XtraBackup works, you will be able to also use the MariaDB backup tool because it's quite similar and it's based in the same code. Sorry. So how does XtraBackup performs backups? Well, I have to say that I'm just covering InnoDB. XtraBackup supports other engines, but InnoDB is the most common. MyISAM has been superseded and it's not being used broadly, and other engines are very specific. But this talk should cover InnoDB perfectly. The databases consist in two kinds of files. We have DB files and we have log files. This is quite a common difference. Almost all the database systems use this approach because when you write into the database, into the table spaces, you write in pages of 16 Ks, and the write is scattered all over the database. This means that you have to perform a lot of IOs, and this can become a bottleneck under some circumstances. And the idea is, if we have to write something, let's perform a small sequential data writes into a single file called the log file. And then when we have time, what we do is apply the changes from the log file into all the different database files. This way we can, for example, we can do some really interesting things. For example, we can join writes together and things like that. And at the same time, we are able to make sure that one of the ACID features is satisfied, the durability one. So how can we make a backup of those data files and the log files? Well, we have two options. We could do a cold backup that just consists in blocking all the writes. We have two options to block all the writes. The first one is blocking effectively with some method to writes, and the other one is just stopping the database. And then when we have a consistent image between the data files and the log files, we we just transfer to the backup storage those files. The problem with this is that, well, we need to block writes. This means that if the backup is quite large, we have a big database, this is going to take a long time. Maybe it's possible to have a better strategy. Okay, the better strategy consists in, well, we will do pretty much the same. We will copy everything because we don't need to block writes. What we need is to copy the data files and to copy the changes. As we are copying both, when we look at the data files, we are able to see if there is any change in the log file to be applied. This means that we can make the backup consistent by copying an inconsistent copy of the database. This is the data files, and then reapplying the changes from the log files. Now, a small explanation about a concept called LSN. This is the log sequence number. Each database page has a sequence number assigned, and each entry in the log files, if you remember, I said that the log files are using sequential raw data writes. Each of these entries have a sequence number assigned. What is the log sequence number? The last sequence number, sorry, is the number of bytes ever written to the log files at that moment. It's used to identify the last log file entry that modified a database page. This means that if you look at a page and see, let's say the last sequence number is 10, you know that if there's in the log file there's a change to that page with log sequence 9, this change already has been applied, so you don't need to apply it. But for example, if there's a change with last sequence number 15, then you have to apply it. Okay, so as we have an image of each page that tells us the position in the log file, by using those pages and the log file entries, we can create a consistent view of the database. What is important is that this consistent view of the database is a physical image. It's not a logical image. What I mean is that this consistent view contains both committed and uncommitted data. Okay, what happens when a database crashes? I know what I'm explaining can seem a little bit uh, out of the scope of backups, but all the concepts I'm explaining here are used by XtraBackup to perform the backup and to restore the backup. So this is why I'm introducing these concepts. Uh, when we have a database, well, it's quite simple. We have concurrency. This means that transactions that are being executed at the same time and the time flows and transactions are applied. What happens when the database crashes? Well, we have uh, transactions that when they are committed uh, are flushed into the InnoDB log files. Okay, but at the same time, MySQL to avoid having a lot of data not dumped from let's say pending transactions and committed transactions to be dumped into the log files, just to make sure that commit is quick. InnoDB does not wait until you commit to flush the whole transaction. InnoDB flushes data every second, even if this data is not committed. So this is the situation we see here. So we are seeing that here we are flushing each and every transaction, but after the last transaction before the crash, we have a few flushes that were executed with data of transactions that, due to the crash, could not commit because this was supposed to happen after the the crash. Okay, so what happens is that the database, when tries to start after a crash, finds the situation we described before and just rolls back the transactions that were started but were not finished, and then starts again accepting transactions. So what we have here is when we make a backup, we make an inconsistent copy of data files and we copy the log files required. This is the backup that XtraBackup does. But with this copy, we have an inconsistent copy of the database. What we need to do is to make it consistent. This means we need to apply the log changes that were pending to the database files. But we need to do also one thing. We need to roll back unfinished transactions. And the last step, once we have done this, the previous step is called prepare, we are able to restore the backup to the destination. I hope it's you are understanding what I mean. In any case, feel free to ask any question, or even you don't worry, you can ping me after the talk to if you have any doubt. Okay. And now we are going to a practical part of the talk, is how to perform a backup. Well, XtraBackup is a quite easy tool. You need to execute XtraBackup. You have to tell which operation are you going to perform, which is the target directory, and a parameter that I really recommend is strict. A strict means if there's a parameter that you are using that I don't recognize, I will fail. Otherwise, I will ignore it. I recommend using a strict because sometimes you can make a typo, for example, and then XtraBackup does not recognize the parameter and performs the default action. Okay, for example, you can tell the backup to be stored on a target directory. If you wrong target, for example, you don't write the dash in the middle or something like that, it will work, but it will store the backup on your current directory. So I really recommend strongly to use the strict flag. Also, XtraBackup needs a user and a password with some privileges to perform the backup because sorry sorry because the backup is not only copying the log files and the database files. It also needs to know about the structure of the database. It also needs to know which is the first log entry that hasn't been applied. So it needs information about a running database. So XtraBackup can only be executed on running databases, and you need to connect to be able to connect to that database. Once you perform the backup, that it is stored as we've seen before in the target directory, you will have a bunch of files, and you will also have some information files which are quite useful. First, because they contain information, for example, like the start time and the end time of the backup. This is a quite useful information, for example, to know if a backup had any kind of issue. It's not normal to have backups that take less than they should, for example. So measuring the time a backup takes or needs is a good idea. It also tells you information about the parameters used for the backup, and it also tells you the binary log position of the database at the end of the backup. This information is also available on a file called XtraBackup binlog info. Okay, this is more or less the output of a backup. I created a short version. Here you have 3 dots. This means that I just suppressed the lines in the middle, because a backup can take really a long time, and the information it dumps can be really extensive. The important thing is that you need to check for the exit code, and you need to verify the last line that says completed OK. You can see also the last LSN that was copied in the backup. Okay, so as we said before, we have a backup that is inconsistent. How we can make it consistent? To make the backup consistent, what we need to do is to perform an operation that it's called prepare. Okay. To prepare the backup, you don't need the database credentials, and you need to specify the target directory. This is where the backup is supposed to be located. If you don't specify a target directory, it will create, it will try to prepare the backup in a directory called XtraBackup backup files on the current directory. It is possible to tune prepare to make it faster. We will cover this in the next talk in 20 minutes, 25 minutes. This is the output of a prepare operation. As you can see, it also gives you the completed OK. What the prepare operation does is quite similar to what the database does after a crash. Okay, so as I said before, it's just copying the just applying, sorry, the logs, and after that it starts a database instance and rollbacks the uncommitted transactions. Okay. Once we have the backup prepared, it's important to note that the backup is prepared and is located in a different place. It's located where we wrote it originally. We have to move that backup to the location we want to use as the data directory. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. I've seen somebody who is asking if XtraBackup locks the tables. Well, XtraBackup does a special kind of lock called lock for backup. XtraBackup is not locking the tables, but will lock certain operations to be performed on the tables. For example, well, basically the DDL operations can't be performed on the tables because while the backup is happening, DDL can make the backup inconsistent and you need to understand that we are making an inconsistent copy and trying to make it consistent, and allowing DDLs to happen during the backup makes this really not impossible, but it makes this really very difficult. So when we have to restore a backup, we have two options. One is copy back and the other is move back. Copy back copies the files to the data dir as specified in the MySQL configuration, but you can override this by specifying the data dir parameter to XtraBackup. But if you don't specify, XtraBackup will try to find the data directory by checking the configuration files. It does not require credentials, and it can be tuned not using InnoDB parameters. This is something I have to correct. It can be tuned, for example, using parallelism. You can copy several files at the same time in parallel. This step is not always required. For example, if we want to create a replica, we can perform XtraBackup and write the backup in the location that the new replica will use. In this case, we just need to prepare, and that's it. Actually, one of the things that sometimes is done to verify if a prepare operation has been successful is to start a small instance of MySQL and access the database located in the backup storage, for example. This is the output um, of a copy back operation. As we can see, it's quite clear. What it does is moving that file to the location specified. As we can see here, it says that data is recognized as a server argument, and this is the directory where it's going to copy. And as usual, it reports completed okay when it finishes. Uh, as I said before, the XtraBackup is able to perform also incremental backups. An incremental backup means that you don't need to copy everything. You just need to copy the changes. Okay. As we've seen, every page has a last sequence number assigned. So it's quite easy to understand that if I have a backup, I know the last sequence number of that backup. I can perform an incremental backup just by copying the modified pages that have a last sequence number that's higher. Okay, so I can copy those pages, and by copying those pages and the log entries for this period of time, I can have an incremental backup without copying everything. This means that to perform an incremental backup, we need the previous the LSN from a previous backup, usually a full backup, but it could be the previous LSN from an incremental backup too. So you can have a full backup, incremental, 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 incremental. Okay. If XtraBackup has access to the previous backups, you can tell XtraBackup to look and find the previous LSN. If you don't have access to the previous backups, for example, because you're storing the backups on the cloud, and your account is allowed only to write backups, but it's not allowed to read backups, or you are using some kind of immutable storage that allows you just to write, but does not allow you to read after that for security reasons, then you need to know the last sequence number of the previous backup. So how can XtraBackup know which pages are needed to perform the incremental backup? Well, we have two options. We can check all the pages. And this means that an incremental backup will perform less writes, but it will perform the same number of reads than a full backup, because I have to read each and every page. Or we can have we can use a Percona server for MySQL feature called page change tracking. This page change tracking, what it does is it creates a bitmap of pages that have been changed. It's quite fast. It does not have a huge impact in performance because actually it just needs to write the page that has changed. It's just a list of changed pages. Okay. Uh, and one thing important is that the incremental backups, and this is really, really very important. When you have incremental backups, the flow is you make full backup and then you make a bunch of incremental backups. And we've seen before that when you do a backup, you need to prepare. In the case of incremental backups, you need to do something a little bit different. You need to do something called apply logs. Let's see first how we perform backups. The initial backup is a normal backup. As you can see here, it's a backup, it's full. Once again, sorry. Um, I use the strict flag. I recommend it really very much. Then if we want to perform the first incremental, we just use almost the same parameters, but we tell the backup that there is an incremental base there uh, where it has to check the the previous backup LSN, and we can repeat this process as often as we want. And we could do something that here it's not described. We could have mm, different levels of increment. So, for example, I could do uh, an incremental backup, a full backup, for example, on Monday. I can do an incremental backup on Tuesday using the full backup from Monday as a base. And in the backup of Wednesday, I could decide to use again as a base the backup from Monday, the full backup from Monday. So I can decide which backup I want to use as a base backup. The thing is that this means that, for example, I will need less backups to apply because the incrementals contain more data. This is the output of an incremental backup. I just did a small trick here because this line is, you will see one of these two lines. Here it's saying using the full scan for incremental backup. This means that it will scan all the pages regardless of if the page was changed or not. It has to read to know that information. Or if we haven't it enabled, it will use the change page bitmap. Okay, there's an option even if you have the the, the change page bitmap enabled, it will use it by default. But you can force XtraBackup to scan the pages if you want. So here we have the steps for preparing an incremental backup. The most important difference is that we do a prepare, but with an extra flag called apply log only. For each incremental we apply until the last one that we can just prepare. Why we do the apply log only? Well, we have to do the apply log only because as I showed you, when there's a crash, it rollbacks those transactions from here. And when it does a prepare, it also rollbacks those transactions from here. This means that the data from these transactions is missing. But the thing is that the backup is simulating a crash. Actually, it's not crashing the database. These transactions will complete successfully. So if we roll back this part of transaction, we will not be able to continue with this part of here. We'll have a data that is inconsistent. So when we tell it to apply locally, what we are saying is, okay, apply all those changes here, but don't roll back uncommitted transactions, because I know that I'll need that information in the future. Give me 1 second because I've seen there's a question. Yes, Dave is asking if the incremental bitmap persists over starts. Yes, actually you have to purge it from time to time, because otherwise it can be somehow big. Rafael is asking what are the differences between XtraBackup and MariaDB Backup. The differences are that MariaDB has been forking far away from MySQL, and XtraBackup does not can't perform MariaDB backups just because it can. There are a huge number of differences, and at the same time, MariaDB is developing their own tool, so it really makes no sense to provide a quite similar tool using the same development that the MariaDB is doing actually. XtraBackup can we use for MySQL 5.7 to 8? Yes and no. You have to perform the upgrade process. This means that you need to use XtraBackup 2.4 for 5.7, sorry, and you need to use XtraBackup 8 for MySQL 8. And Michael is asking if there is any information on the dates that the incremental backups are taken. Yes, you have this information stored in the information files we covered at the beginning. And now let's move to the last part because I just have 3 minutes. Well, this is quite easy. We can perform compressed backups also. Easy. Dash compress. It will compress each and every file of the backup using the algorithm we define. If we define one, quick LZ or LZ4, and you can define the number of threads that will be used for compression. So you can have parallel compression. How to prepare a compressed backup? Well, to prepare a compressed backup, first we need to uncompress the backup. We can use the compress option, and we can use the parallel flag to decompress the backup in parallel. It's exactly the same flag that we use for compression. Here we have compressed threads, but curious for decompression, we need to use the parallel flag. Any questions? Well, you can find me here. Give me 1 second because I'll check the question and answer. Is there an option to encrypt XtraBackup backups? Yes. Is there an option? We will cover in the next talk in 5 minutes. What if we are streaming and compressing, resulting in XVStream, for example? How to get the LSN info? Well, this info is you can get it in different ways. First one, it's in the log of the backup. The second one is there's a parameter that we will see later, because for example it's very useful when you send the backups to the cloud, that allows you to store the LSN information about the backup in an additional location. So it will store the LSN with the backup and with at the specified location. Uh, XtraBackup is available for MySQL 8.022. I think it is. Um, and the compress algorithm, what algorithm we have to use? Test. It depends on the type of information you have. As I default, we have compress, which is quite good. Multiple incremental backups, 4 or 5 following full backup for the restoration, taking much time. How can we overcome this? Well, the first thing you can do is you don't need to wait until you need to restore for prepare. So if you have a full backup, uh, you can prepare, you can apply and prepare. David is asking, can XtraBackup handle single DB schema instead of all? Yes, it can. This is something we will cover in the next session in 4 minutes. So, well, I'm going to, sorry. Thank you very much. I'm going to disconnect for a few seconds because I've been speaking for nearly 1 hour, so I want to drink a little bit. Uh, I hope you enjoyed the talk. Do not hesitate to ask anything here or after the next session. And here you have my social network and email address, and I'll be in the conference, so you feel free to ping me and to ask me any doubt. Thank you very much for joining.